Welcome everyone to Journey Through the Books of the Prophets. Before we begin, I want to thank Dara for reminding me that today was the Yahrzeit of a very good friend of ours, part of the Carlebach community in New York, Rabbi Eliezer ben Avraham, very precious neshama, and this was his Yahrzeit. So after the class, I'll ask Dara if she wants to say a few words, and I could share a few words also, as he's a long-time friend. So this class should be merit for the soul of Rabbi Eliezer ben Avram. Should have an aliyah to neshama. Okay, for those who have been following the class, we actually finished the second book of Kings last week. And in essence, this is the end of the long series that we've had, starting with the book of Joshua, then Shoftim, the Judges, first and second books of Shmuel, first and second books of Kings. So we are finishing our series, but what happened was that I came across some incredible teachings in Tractate Sanhedrin, in the Gemara, about many of the kings that we've been studying. And I've been going through it, and it's just really very worthwhile sharing, because it's all the different traditions that the sages had about these kings and what happened to them and why it happened, and kind of like the inside story of a lot of what we've been teaching. Now, I'm going to mention in the beginning that I'm going to go through most of it. It runs for 3, 4, 5 pages. Excuse me. And so therefore, I'm not going to give over every single piece. As the Talmud usually does, it goes off on tangents. But it primarily deals with Yerovam, Achav, and Menashe. These 3 kings. And I have to say is that some of the information is quite surprising, because we've been learning it according to what's called the pshat, the simple, straightforward understanding of the text. And even with the Mamlo Ez, it didn't give over a lot of what the Gemara had to say. And here we're going to find a lot of the reasons of what happened in the Book of Kings. But we're also going to find a lot of very surprising opinions about who these kings were, what their motivations were, and their level of evil. We'll put it that way. So I'm saying that outright. And we're going to start with the Mishna. For those who want to follow now or follow later, it's on page 90A of the Tractate of Sanhedrin. And I mentioned this a number of times, that this is a tractate called Chelek, not a tractate, excuse me, a chapter called Chelek, which means a portion. And it runs for, as I've mentioned, the longest straight Agadata in the whole Talmud. It runs for well over 20 pages. No really halachic material of Jewish law, all just stories and metaphors and mysticism and allegories and traditions about many of these kings that we've been learning about. So the Mishnah begins, Kol Yisrael yesh lehem chelek la'olam haba. That's why this whole tractate is called Chelek. All of Israel has a portion of the world to come. And this is taken from a verse in Isaiah 60:21. And the verse is, Ve'amech kulam tzadikim. Your people are all righteous. Le'olam yerushu eretz. They will inherit the land forever. Neitzer mata'ai. They are the branch of my plantings. Ma'aseh yedei lehitpa'er. God is speaking. Israel is my handiwork in whom I take pride. Now this verse could be familiar to a lot of people because in Pirkei Avot, the chapters of the fathers, that some people read it every Shabbos, but especially the 7 Shabbos is between Pesach and Shavuos. People learn Pirkei Avot 1 chapter at a time, and in between each chapter, this verse appears. So this was incorporated into the ethics of the fathers, Pirkei Avot, and it begins, V'yamech kulam tzadikim. All of your people are righteous. So that's how this chapter begins. And so here it began by saying, in other words, every Jew has a portion of the world to come. And we learned last week already that righteous non-Jews also have a place in the world to come. It's not an exclusive club only for Jews. All righteous people have a place in the world to come. But then the Mishnah says, however, these are the people who do not have a place in the world to come. And since this is not our main purpose here, is to go in depth through this Mishnah, but it mentions those people who don't believe that the resurrection of the dead comes from the Torah. Those who don't believe that Torah comes from God, from heaven, that it's divine. And there's a few other opinions of who doesn't merit the world to come. But then towards the end of the Mishnah, it says like this, Shlosha Melachim v'arba hediyot ein lehem chelek la'olam haba. There are 3 kings and 4 commoners who do not have a portion of the world to come. This is what we're going to be studying. And who are the 3? Yerovam, who is the first of the kings of the northern kingdom. Achav, who is married to Izebel. And this is at the time of Eliyahu Navi, Elijah the prophet. We learned about all this. And the last one was Menashe. Menashe is the son of Chizkiyahu, and he ruled for 55 years. These 3 do not have a portion of the world to come. But Rabbi Yehuda comes, and we'll learn this more in depth, and says, no, Menashe does have a place in the world to come. And what is his proof? He brings from the book of Chronicles, as we learned, that when he was taken and we'll see, we discussed this last week, what is the breakdown of the 55 years that Menashe ruled? Because in the book of Chronicles, though it is not mentioned in the book of Kings at all, is that Menashe at one point, when he was 22 years into his kingship, he became king at age 12. So when he was 34, he was taken in chains to Babylonia. And there, in the book of Chronicles, it says explicitly that he turned to God, and God listened to his prayer and received it, and had him returned to Jerusalem to be a king for the rest of his life. And according to the book of Chronicles, he did tshuva, and he really changed his ways. So Rabbi Yehuda says, why are you saying that he doesn't have a place in the world to come? It says that he did tshuva. And the sages reply, God returned him to being king, but did not return his portion of the world to come. That's all that is stated in the Mishnah. We'll get to that discussion in greater length. So, as I said, our point here is not to study this whole Mishnah because that's what the Gemara does for 20 pages. It goes through every part of the Mishnah and discusses it. But what we're going to do is we're going to pick up on page 101b. And this is where the discussion begins about these three kings. We're going to learn most of what's written here, but not all, because, as I said, the Gemara want to go off on tangents. And my purpose is not to overly extend this series. At least technically, we're supposed to be going to America in 2.5 weeks for Pesach, and it's far from clear whether we will be able to go. But in all cases, once the month of Nisan comes, we always take a break anyways. So for the next 2 or 3 weeks, we will be learning from the Talmud of Sanhedrin. And as I said, it's quite fascinating. So we're starting on 101b, and Rabbi Yochanan begins and says, on what merit did Yerovam come to be king of the northern kingdom? Just to review, when at the end of Shlomo's life, he did not do good in God's eyes. And the text says that he worshipped idols. He totally turned away from God and worshipped idols and set up idols. The sages explain that not to take this literally, but because Shlomo had married so many foreign wives, and supposedly they all had converted, but apparently most, or even close to all of them, held on to their previous ways, and Shlomo did not stop them. He allowed them to worship their foreign gods, and therefore the text attributes it as if he did it himself. Nonetheless, the text makes it very clear that God was very unhappy with Shlomo, and says that because of this, the kingdom of Israel is going to suffer. And we're going to see that's why the northern kingdom came into existence altogether, is because of the sins that Shlomo had done at the end of his life, or at least the sins that he allowed to happen in his kingdom without stopping them, even though he had the power to stop them, but he didn't. So the first thing that the Rabbi Yochanan asks, well, on what merit did he become the king of the northern kingdom, 10 of the 10 tribes? So he says like this, because he rebuked Shlomo HaMelech. Remember, because Shlomo HaMelech was not doing right in God's eyes, and he rebuked him. Therefore, he deserved, or he merited, to become the first king of the northern kingdom. But then the next line, the Gemara says, and why was he subsequently punished? He became an evil king. Even when he became king, he was considered very righteous. He became an evil king that virtually all the other kings of the northern kingdom followed. So what did he do to lose that merit? So interestingly enough, it says that he rebuked Shlomo HaMelech, but he did it in public. So this is very interesting. He merited to become king because he rebuked Shlomo HaMelech, and he merited to be punished because he rebuked Shlomo HaMelech. But the difference was because he did it in public. And that is considered, if you need to rebuke someone, first of all, you have to know how to rebuke someone. But the fact that Shlomo HaMelech was king and yet he rebuked him publicly was, call it a mark against Yerovam. And then they quote a verse that says that Yerovam raised his hand against Shlomo HaMelech because he had built up the Millo and closed the breach of the city of David. So the Gemara explains what is going on here. So we know that the first wife that Shlomo married was the daughter of Pharaoh. And it was very controversial because he married her on the same day that he dedicated the temple. And the Midrash tells us that when he married her, what are they called? Reeds were planted in what came to be known as the city of Rome. In other words, what he did had far-reaching ramifications, that he planted the seeds of his own destruction, because it was the Romans who destroyed the second temple. And so the fact that he married the daughter of Pharaoh on the same day that he inaugurated the temple was considered just not a good thing to do. And so we saw in the text that Shlomo HaMelech built the temple. He also built himself an exquisite palace, and he also built a palace for his wife, the daughter of Pharaoh. And apparently where he chose to put this palace of the daughter of Pharaoh was in a place called the Millo. And the Millo was public. It was like a public gathering place until he took the land and he built this palace for the wife of Pharaoh. And then he stopped up the other entrances to Jerusalem. So everyone had to enter by that entrance that was by her palace so that she could tax people. Anyone who wanted to come in the city had to pay like a toll, like you go on the highway. You have to pay a toll. And so this is what Yerovam rebuked Shlomo for. And he said, your father opened up gates to Jerusalem and you closed them and took away public land and made it that everyone had to do homage to the wife of Pharaoh. That was the rebuke. But then it says that he raised his hand against the king. So there's a number of opinions that are given here. What does it mean that he raised his hand against the king? And so one of the opinions it continues on 101b, is that he removed his tefillin. He was wearing tefillin when he gave this rebuke. And then in front of the king, he took off his tefillin. It was like a sign of disrespect towards the king. Others say that he took off his tefillin because he needed to go to the bathroom. And you can't go into the bathroom with tefillin. So they say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, they say, well, he did it in front of the king as if to say, I'm through talking with you. I need to go to the bathroom. And he started to take off his tefillin. However we learn it, he showed disrespect to Shlomo in a public setting. So here we have this idea that sometimes the same thing that could bring you merit, but if it's not done in the right way, it could bring you the opposite of merit. So this reminds me of a story. It's not exactly the same. It's a little bit different, but it has the same theme. And once a student of the Ropchitzer Rabbi comes running into the Rabbi and says, Rabbi, I think my father's having a heart attack. He's like collapsing. I don't know what to do. So the Rebbe said, quick, make him a strong cup of coffee, give him some coffee, and he'll be fine. So the student does this, and his father recovers. A few weeks later, the same thing happens. He comes running to the Rebbe. Rebbe, my father is collapsing again. I made him a strong cup of coffee, but it didn't help. And the Ropchitzer says to him, you gave him a strong cup of coffee? You could kill him. So here, the same cup of coffee, everything depends on the context. Everything depends on the timing. And so in one case, a strong cup of coffee maybe could save someone's life. And even though it seems like maybe it's the same circumstances, a same cup of coffee at the wrong time could kill a person. So this is, it's a bit of a funny story, but this is one of the general principles of Jewish law, is that why do we need rabbis altogether? We have so many books of Jewish law. So you don't know the answer to what to do? Look it up. It's all written out there. Okay, you could answer, well, not everyone reads Hebrew. Not everyone understands the subtleties of Jewish law. That's true. But the principle I'm trying to give over here is that in essence, there's virtually never two cases that are exactly the same. So if you only have a book and you read the context and you think that every case that is like similar is going to fit into that one halacha, it doesn't work like that. Because every circumstance is a little bit different. People are different. Circumstances are different. Contexts are different. Subtleties are different. And so I thought it was very interesting that the first thing we learn about Yerovam was how he became king and how, in a certain way, he lost the merit ultimately to be king. Okay, so now we're continuing. Then Rav Nachman says, he gives a different reason. Well, no, he gives the first of the reasons why doesn't Yerovam merit a place in the world to come. Now we have to understand many and we're going to get to it. Many of the kings of Israel in the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom were what the text says, did evil in God's eyes. But only 3 of them are told that they don't have the world to come. The Gemara later asks, well, what about all these other kings? They also did evil. So here we have to learn degree and exactly what the text means. Well, we're going to find out that some of the simple understandings that we had of these 3 particular kings, we get a very different view from the Gemara. So Rabbi Nachman says that it was the arrogance of Yerovam that caused him to lose a place in the world to come and caused him to do evil. So how is it explained? So it gives Yerovam's thought process. So he says like this, that the reason, now I'm going to go to the end, that Yerovam made it forbidden for anyone to go to Jerusalem for the 3 holidays. And what did he do in exchange? He set up 2 golden calves. One in 1 second. One in Dan and one in Bethel. He set up a golden calf in Bethel, a golden calf in Dan, and he said to the people of the northern kingdom, you're forbidden to go to Jerusalem. They set up guards. They had like border guards. They would not let anyone go for the 3 pilgrimage holidays to Jerusalem. And he said, but now you can worship these golden calves. So now the Gemara explains, well, how did he come to this whole thing? So his thought process was like this. He said, if I allow people to go even just to 3 pilgrimage holidays, then they are going to become attached to Jerusalem. They're going to offer offerings at the temple. And there, they're going to see that the king of the southern kingdom is from Yehuda. Yerovam, of course, was not from Yehuda. And so therefore, I can't let anyone do that. And even more than that, if he himself would have gone for the 3 pilgrimage holidays, so when he came to the temple, and if the king was there, there is a law that no one is allowed to one second. No one is allowed to sit in the temple courtyard other than the kings of the house of Yehuda. So he reasoned like this: if I go there and I do sit, because I am a king, I'm not from Yehuda, but I am a king, then people will, no, the opposite. If I stand and the king is there, and they know I'm the king of the northern kingdom, here's the king of the southern kingdom, the fact that I won't sit down must mean that the king of Yehuda is on a higher level than I am. And if I do sit down, which would indicate that I'm equal with the king of Yehuda, then they could arrest me on the spot for being disloyal to the king of Yehuda. So either way, I lose. Therefore, I'm not going to go anymore because my position is compromised, and therefore I'm not going to let anyone else go. And that's how he came to set up these golden calves in Beit El and Dan. And this started all of the evil that he had done. So then it says, then there's a verse that says that Yerovam, he took counsel and made the golden calves. So the Gemara asks, well, who did he take counsel from? So then the Gemara tells this story that he called together all of the, call it the wise ones, those who had been chosen to be his counselors, the important people, and he had a big meeting. And what he did was he then found people of not very high standing. We'll call them evil people. That's what the Gemara calls them. And he sat them next to each one of these righteous people. And so Yerovam said to this whole gathering, he said, will you sign your approval to all that I am going to do? Now, we have to understand at this point, Yerovam was considered very righteous, very kosher, very good person. And he said that, will you agree and will you sign a document that you'll agree to everything that I am going to do? And everyone said, the good people, the not so good people said, yes. And then he said, and if I am your king, do you approve that I will be your king? We're going to go back and understand how he was anointed to be king by the prophet Achia HaShiloni. It wasn't a public thing. The prophet came in God's name and appointed him king. Now here, he's getting, let's say, the rubber stamp from the important people of the northern kingdom. So will you agree in writing that I'll be the king? Yep. Yeah, sounds good. Then he said, will you do anything that I tell you to do? They said, yes. Then he said, even if I command you to worship idols? And so the righteous people said, heaven forbid, chas v'shalom, that we can't agree to. We can't agree that you would worship idols. So here's the reason that he planted all of these evil people. So the evil people, now obviously the righteous people didn't know that they were evil, and they were chosen by Yerovam for this very moment. So they turned to the righteous people and said, do you really think that he would ask anyone to worship idols? Of course not. He's just testing you how loyal you are. Yerovam is a righteous person. Why would we even think that he would ask? He's just testing you. And so the people went along with this. They went along with this. Now here's the key. Now, who was among the righteous people there? Was Achia HaShiloni, the very prophet that came in God's name and anointed him king. But as we learned, when he chose him as king, he said, this is on the stipulation that you will follow the Torah, you'll be righteous, you will listen to God, you will do everything that is right in God's eyes. that is the only way that you will be king and remain king. So here it says that for some reason Achia fell for this trick. Because again, God told Achia HaShiloni to appoint this person. And so Achia, we'll call him, he was a bit naive. He didn't see the game that Yerovam was playing here. He didn't say, remember, this whole thing started like, why did he lose his portion in the world to come? And Rabbi Nachman said it was because of his arrogance, because he couldn't stand the idea that the king of Yehuda, who only had 2 tribes, would be considered greater than him. It was his pride, his ego, his arrogance. And so Achia HaShiloni all signed with everyone else. There was this contract. And part of it was, if the king asks you to worship idols, will you do it? Well, Achia HaShiloni also signed. So the Gemara says, well, how do we know that he signed? Where do we know that? So now they bring in another story that we learned. I hope everyone is appreciating this. We're going back over all these stories that we learned, but here the Gemara is filling in some of the information that's not written in the Book of Kings. So they ask, well, how do we know this whole contract happened, and especially that Achia HaShiloni also signed? And so they said, we know it from Yehu. Yehu became king of the northern kingdom. But at this point, what happened was that God, through the prophet, came to Yehu and said, because God had come to Yerovam and said to Yerovam towards the end of his life, because of all of the evil that you did, I am not only taking away the kingship from you, but your entire lineage is going to be wiped out. It's going to cease to exist. And he goes to Yehu. God, in the name of the prophet in the name of God comes to Yehu and says, God has appointed you to destroy the entire house of Yerovam. Yerovam, we learned, had 70 sons. He had married many, many, many women, and those sons had sons. In other words, there's a lot of lineage here. And we're not going to go back over it, but it was one of the bloodiest chapters in the Book of Kings, that Yehu, who was considered a very righteous person, if a prophet comes to you in God's name and tells you what to do, so he did what God said. To make a long story short, he killed the entire family of Yerovam in a couple of different incidences. He kills everyone. And then what happens is he wants to wipe out the worship of the Baal, one of the idol worships that Achav had set up. And so what he did was he called for a huge gathering to worship the Baal. And he said to the people, he said that Yerovam and Achav, they worship the idol, the idol of Baal a little, I will worship it a lot. And so people thought he was being honest. So he called for all of the priests of Baal. These were the ones that were left after Achav. And they had this like huge convention. And it's not clear how many people inside, but a lot of people. And then he surrounded the place and he told the people outside, if anyone escapes, you will pay with your life. And so there was a huge slaughter of all of those who worshiped the Baal. Now, depending how we look at this, Yehu was doing what God told him to do. So going back to what the Gemara is saying, the question was, how do we know about this contract that was signed with Yerovam and that Achia HaShiloni signed? So they said like this, that after all of this, Yehu became king. And about Yehu, it says that he got rid of the Baal, but he didn't get rid of the 2 golden calves that Yerovam had set up. He allowed this worship of these 2 idols to continue, even though he got rid of the Baal. And they asked, well, why didn't he? Wasn't he aware that these 2 golden idols were forbidden, were a type of idol worship? But we're going to learn later, it's not so clear that they were thought of for idol worship. Nonetheless, the proof that is brought is Yehu says, I saw the contract myself that Achia HaShiloni had signed. And it said that if I say to worship idols, you will agree. Well, the prophets signed on it. So that's why I didn't get rid of them. So that's what the Gemara explains, the problem that happened through this whole contract, and the fact that by mistake, through being naive, Achia HaShiloni himself signed it, because at that point he thought Yerovam was very, very righteous. So obviously some of these things are quite complicated and are quite paradoxical. They're very, very paradoxical, but here we see how important free will is. Because God is the one who told Achia HaShiloni to appoint Yerovam the king. But then if we ask, well, isn't God omnipotent? Doesn't God know the future? Doesn't he know what Yerovam is going to end up doing? So how could he appoint him in the first place? And this is where it's mysterious, it's paradoxical, but God always gives, except in certain circumstances, a person free will. When Yerovam was appointed, he was very righteous. He could have remained righteous. It wasn't written in stone that he would become evil. He did, though. And so then that's where the paradox comes in. And so many people have just explained, we're not going to go into this great paradox. The Rambam said, if all the seas were ink, it would not be enough to write about the paradox of free will and divine omniscience and providence. But one of the ideas is on Rosh Hashanah. We read the story about Yishmael and how Sarah, because she feels that Yishmael is a very bad influence on Yitzchak, has he and Hagar banished from their house. And she goes to the desert, they run out of water, and it seems that Yishmael is about to die. Hagar cries out to God. An angel comes and saves them. So the Midrash asks, didn't God know how many problems Yishmael would make for the Jewish people in the future? God knows everything. So why did he save him? So that in the text, it says that at that moment, Yishmael was also crying out, and Hagar was crying out. And the verse is that the angel saw Yishmael asher hu sham, like he was there. And it's explained that we read this on Rosh Hashanah so that a person won't say to themselves, I know myself. I would like to do tshuva. I would like to be good. I would like to be strong. I would like to be moral and ethical. But I know myself. I can improve a little bit, but I know I'm going to fall back. So why try it all? Why even go to shul on Rosh Hashanah and promise God that I'm going to be better when I know that even though I would like to be, I'm going to fall back? And so it's explained that this story of Yishmael, that God and the angel saw Yishmael where he was at that moment, he was worthy of being saved. And it didn't matter at that moment what might have happened. Yishmael and his descendants could have been good. It could have been that we weren't having problems with them to this day. That God knowing the result doesn't necessarily mean it has to be that way, which would mean that there's no free will. And so here we get to the paradox, which I'm not going to continue with right now. But this is the same thing that we crossed when Isaiah came to Chizkiyahu and said, why aren't you married? Why aren't you having children? And Chizkiyahu said, I have Ruach HaKodesh that I'm going to give birth to a very evil son. And I don't want that to happen. And Yeshayahu said that your mitzvah is to get married and have children. What happens after that, you do your best, but that's not your concern right now. So what happens? He marries Isaiah's daughter. He has a son called Menashe, who turns into one of the kings who does not have a portion in the world to come because of all of the evil that he did. Obviously, these things are mysterious, paradoxical. And so we're just touching on it here a little, but it strengthens this idea of free will. And when we say that God knows what will happen, the way we could learn it is, since God is infinite and there are almost an infinite amount of possibilities of the result of human beings have free will. So God sees all of them. But by God seeing all of the possibilities, it doesn't write it in stone that any one of them has to happen. That's one way out of the we'll call it the paradox. God sees all the possibilities. And so Yerovam, when he was made king, he was righteous. And the fact that he became arrogant and egotistical and prideful, and he led Israel into sin, that wasn't called written in stone or written in the stars. These were choices that Yerovam made, and it was the choices that people made to follow him. So that's the strength of free will here. Okay, I'm just trying to decide at what point to stop here. So the Gemara continues and says that if a person did not go to Jerusalem for the 3 pilgrimage holidays, it's a positive mitzvah. And what it means is a person has not done a positive mitzvah, meaning that it's not a good thing, but it's not the worst thing in the world as far as Jewish law comes. But Yerovam made it that if you did go for the 3 holidays, you would be put to death. So the Gemara points out that Yerovam was more stringent than even the Torah, that not worshiping these golden idols and instead going to Jerusalem could have the penalty of death, whereas not going up is relatively a light punishment. That's how egotistical he became, how fanatic he became, that I am king of the northern kingdom, and you can pay no homage to God or the king of Yehuda. Okay, so I want to end with one last idea, which in a certain way will make the discussion we just had of free will and God's omniscience or determinism even more complicated. So when God sent Achia HaShiloni to find Yerovam and make him king, it begins by saying, Vayehi be'et hahi, v'Yerovam yatsa miYerushalayim, v'yimtza oto Achia HaShiloni hanavi, b'derech v'hu mitkaseh b'salma chadasha. And it was at that time that Yerovam left Yerushalayim, and the prophet Achia HaShiloni found him, and he was wearing a new garment. And so, one of the asides here, but it's a tangent that's important, is Rabbi Yossi says that moment was predestined for misfortune. So this kind of flies in the face of what we just said. Because if nothing is written in the stars, nothing is written in stone, then what does he mean that this was predestined for misfortune? And how does he learn it? from the words be'etahi. And so what happens is Rabbi Yossi brings a number of other incidences in the Tanakh that begin with the same words, be'etahi. And he says all of them were predestined for misfortune. And one of them was one second. Again, he brings a whole list of them, some of them from the prophets. But one of them was when Yehuda went down from his brothers after they had sold Yosef. And according to the Midrash, Yehuda was always to be the king. And he was the one who said, no, let's not kill him, but let's sell him. And they listened to him, and that's what happened. And then afterwards, according to the Midrash, they kind of blamed Yehuda, like, you're the leader. If you would have said to us, we have to return him to our father, we would have listened to you. So then it says, Ba'etahi v'yared Yehuda me'et achiv, that Yehuda went down from his brothers. And so here again, Rabbi Yossi says, Eit muzmenet lepurianot. This was a time that was predestined for misfortune. But now look at the paradox here, because out of this whole incident, he marries, he has 3 sons. The first son marries Tamar and he dies. The second son marries Tamar and he dies. And then the third son, Yehuda does not want to give him to Tamar. She dresses up as a prostitute. She entices Yehuda. She becomes pregnant. And from that pregnancy comes the lineage of King David. So the question is, so why is this called a time of misfortune? That's how mysterious. I gave that over maybe too quickly. But it seemed like it was misfortune. Yehuda feels like he's going into exile from his brothers after selling Yosef. And yet that misfortune turned into the lineage of King David coming from Yehuda and Tamar. And then here, this is just the last part of this tangent is that they add a teaching from Rabbi Yossi about the place of Shechem. And he says like this, V'yelech Yerovam Shechem, ki Shechem ba kol Yisrael lahamlich oto. So after this whole incident with this contract, Yerovam went to Shechem, and he was accepted by the whole northern kingdom as king in Shechem. And so Rabbi Yossi wants to point out that this idea of a time that is predestined for misfortune, and also has a connection to a place. And so he continues and says, Yerovam wait one second. He says that the place of Shechem, here it's not Yerovam, excuse me, it's Rechavam. When Rechavam is the son of Shlomo. And when the kingdom was split, Rechavam became the king of the southern kingdom. Yerovam became the king of the northern kingdom. Yet, after Shlomo died and Rehoboam became king, he went to Shechem to be accepted as the king. But what happened shortly afterwards is because of very, very foolish mistakes by Rehoboam that we learned about, that caused the kingdom to split. That's what caused the 10 tribes to rebel against Rehoboam. So when Rehoboam went to be king in Shechem, it was already from Shlomo, his father, the seeds of disunity had already been planted. But it goes on, and it says, even before this, Shechem was a place predestined for misfortune, because there in Shechem, Dinah was violated, and in Shechem is where Yosef was sold. And so Yosef was sold in Shechem, Dinah was raped or violated in Shechem. Rehoboam, who ended up causing the split of the kingdom, went there. So he says even a place can be predestined for problems. So here we'll end for tonight, but we see how complicated all of this is. And this we come back to this all the time, the paradox of free will and God's omniscience, God's providence, what is determined, what isn't determined. And this is something we, in a certain way, we live with 24/7. This is the context of this mystery or this paradox of free will, and we'll call it here determinism, because that's how we ended, that these times and these places were determined for misfortune. But we need a very deep understanding of how that comes to be. And if we're truly chained to these predetermined things, because we're told, Ein Mazal Yisrael. There is no influence of the constellations on Israel. But as we learned, that's not exactly true. There is tremendous influence from the constellations when we don't follow the Torah. When we follow the Torah, even though their influences are there, it doesn't mean that they're predetermined and predestined to affect us. So here again, we have this type of paradox. Now, what it doesn't mention here is one of the first places that Avraham Avinu comes when he comes into the land is Shechem. And we learned this, that there is one opinion that the Brit Ben Abitarim happens in Shechem. The covenant that God made between the Jewish people and the land of Israel was made in Shechem. And when we came into the land, we came to Shechem, because that's where the two mountains of Mount Gerizim and Mount Eval are. And that's where we had the blessing and the curse. And that, in a certain way, is the secret of why we came back to Shechem and we pronounced a blessing and a curse there, because it can go either way. There are influences, let's say in Shechem, or at certain moments of time that seem predestined for a curse, but it could be a blessing just as well. And so here we have with these two mountains, For those who come to our Tuesday class, the spiritual geography of the land of Israel, we learned about this a couple of weeks ago, the significance of these two mountains and the blessing and the curse. But we know from the book of Devarim that Parshat Re'eh, Anochi noten lifnechem hayom bracha uklala. God says, see, I put before you today a blessing and a curse. And then the Torah continues. The blessing is if you follow the Torah and God, you'll have a blessing. If you don't, then chas v'sholom, that's when the curse is coming. And later, it says in the Torah, and this is the only mention of free will in the Torah, where it says, I have put before you today a blessing and a curse, life and death, ubecharta b'chaim, and you shall choose life. So really, every moment is a very, very deep and profound understanding. Every moment can be a blessing or a curse. We'll call it, it's in the air. The possibilities of blessing and curse, this is part of eating from Eitz Hadat Tov V'Ra, eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Good and evil are there 24/7, always. And we always have the choice. There are times where God intervenes. God pushes us in a certain direction. But the general principle is that at every moment we have the choice between good and evil and life and death. So this is a deep way to end what we were learning today, because it's in between the lines here. Very, very in between the lines. And hopefully just to whet your appetite, probably the most surprising revelations that come out of these Talmudic teachings is, according to the simple understanding, these three kings were just evil through and through. And yet, we're going to learn it's not so clear. It's much more subtle, much more nuanced, how evil they were, their motivations, but mostly, I think part of the reason that these three kings do not have a place in the world to come, because according to the Gemara, they were all Torah scholars. Because when you read the text, you do not get that feeling at all. You get the feeling that they just were power hungry, evil, idol worshipers, didn't care about God, didn't care about Torah. But apparently, as what we'll learn, is they were all considered Torah scholars. And yet, they ended up doing evil in the eyes of God, real evil. So that's just a hint to what else we have coming up.